Breaking news. Putin has Wagner reorganized for combat operations. Despite Prigozhin's absence and Ukraine preoccupations, Russia has decided to reassert its influence in Africa, as evidenced by the visit of Libya's Marshal Haftar to Moscow. On Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Marshal Khalifa Haftar, the supreme commander of the Libyan Arab Armed Forces, LAAF, and the strongman of eastern Libya. The Libyan Arab Air Force, LAAF, announced that Haftar met with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in the Russian capital Moscow, without providing further context. Dmitry Peskov, a spokesman for the Kremlin, confirmed the meeting and said, "The situation in Libya and the region as a whole was discussed," without providing further details. Moscow has kept in touch with Marshal Haftar, who supports the rival UN-backed administration in Tobruk. Since this was the first time Haftar and Putin had met since the beginning of the year, the Kremlin should have issued a readout, but Moscow's silence indicates a high level of sensitivity. A readout of Putin's meeting with Deputy Defense Minister Yunus Bek-Yevkarev and Andrei Troshev, who previously participated in Wagner's combat missions, was released by the Kremlin on Friday, however. Haftar met with Yevkarev, a frequent visitor to eastern Libya in recent years and the point person for Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, during his time in Moscow. They most recently met on September 17 in Benghazi. Despite Haftar's heavy reliance on Wagner forces, the Turkish-backed armed forces were ultimately successful in their 2019 siege of Tripoli. In 2020, the United Nations released a report estimating that 1,200 Wagner fighters supported Haftar. Experts estimate hundreds have remained active in the oil terminal zone and southern Libya since then. The Sahel region is increasingly looking to Moscow as a security provider in place of the West. It is unclear whether Haftar's trip to Moscow was related to his planned effort to retake Tripoli, but it does indicate Russia's decision to reassert its influence in Africa in spite of Prigozhin's absence and the focus on Ukraine. Russia's interest in Libya, which has strategic appeal for Moscow, may have been rekindled by the recent anti-Western-leaning coup in Niger. There have been recent shifts in the international web surrounding Libya, with key protagonists such as Turkey and major Arab and European powers showing signs of retreat. The stabilization of Libya and the reduction of the influx of migrants will be seen as good news throughout Europe as well. Therefore, Moscow is probably feeling relatively powerful. The United States abruptly withdrew from Libya in September 2012 after the deadly attack on the U.S. special mission in Benghazi by members of the extremist group Ansar al-Sharia, in which the American ambassador and 3 other U.S. citizens were killed. The big question is whether or not the United States intends to return to Libya. It was more than just a coincidence that on the eve of Haftar's trip to Moscow, U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, Chief General Michael Langley paid an unannounced visit to Benghazi and met with him. Langley is based in Stuttgart, Germany. It's possible that Langley cautioned Haftar against putting all of his hope in the Russians. An article in last week's issue of The Intercept recalled that General Langley's visit to Benghazi on September 20–21 was the latest twist in America's on-again, off-again relationship with Haftar, a former favorite of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi who, in the late 1980s, joined a US-backed group of dissidents seeking to topple his former boss. As the article puts it, after their coup plans fizzled and the rebels wore out their welcome on the African continent, the CIA evacuated Haftar and 350 of his men to the U.S., where he was granted citizenship and lived in suburban Virginia for the next 20 years. The United States' signals to Haftar have been contradictory over time. His troops' special forces training came courtesy of the CIA. After Langley's meeting with Haftar, he stated, "The United States stands ready to reinforce existing bonds and forge new partnerships with those who champion democracy." Which is an odd claim to make considering the context. You shouldn't be surprised if Haftar shared details of his meeting with the AFRICOM chief with the Russians. In a brief press release, AFRICOM stated that the purpose of Langley's trip was to further cooperation between the United States and Libya. Following the meeting, Langley said, "It was a pleasure meeting with civilian and military leaders throughout Libya. The backdrop here could be that Washington feels compelled to step in and replace France after the coup in Niger." Washington and the coup leaders in Niamey have renewed the U.S.-Niger agreement on combating terrorism now that the much-discussed ECOWAS intervention in Niger is no longer on the agenda, and with Nigeria backing away from any such misadventure. Washington thus recognizes the transitional government in Niger and maintains a military presence there, though the American military contingent has moved from the 101st Base in Niamey to the 201st Air Force Base in Agadez, the only drone base in Sahel, which was constructed at a cost of over $100 million and is therefore of critical importance. The United States has chosen to be friendly with the new authorities in Niamey, which has angered France and the European Union. However, the U.S. has always been more cautious and expectant about the coup in Niger due to its emphasis on counter-terrorist operations in the Sahel region. To what extent would these dramatic events cause the United States and Russia to have shared interests in the future is an intriguing question. Some American analysts had hinted that after the coup in Niger, it might be possible for Wagner to live in the country with his family. Because of American public sensitivity to Libya due to past U.S. failures and a perceived lack of trust in Libyan authorities, the Biden administration may not oppose Russia's support for Haftar's takeover bid, and Moscow may even encourage it. Putin's meeting with two key Russian officials associated with Wagner on Friday, the day after he received Haftar, suggests that the Kremlin is hastening the move to reorganize the militia's combat missions abroad. Putin reaffirmed last year's promise to provide Wagner fighters with the same pay and benefits as regular soldiers. These offers have become increasingly attractive. Putin added that convicted felons who participated in Wagner's military operations while serving their sentences would be eligible for the enticing social guarantees. Surely this time around they will go by a different name and be organized as volunteer units, reporting to Yevkarev, himself a seasoned veteran in counter-terrorist operations in North Caucasus, answering to the Defense Ministry's Foreign Military Intelligence Agency, which was originally created under its current form by Joseph Stalin in 1942 after the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany. Putin lavished praise on Andrei Troshev and asked for his thoughts on creating volunteer units which will fulfill various combat missions, including in the zone of the special military operation, during their meeting at the Kremlin on Friday. To Troshev, Putin said, "You fought in one of such units yourself for more than a year. You've experienced it, learned the ropes, and are aware of the preemptive measures that must be taken to guarantee the safest and most effective completion of combat missions." Haftar's visit may have emphasized the need to reassemble Wagner forces for combat missions in Libya and elsewhere in Sahel where the security situation has worsened due to the presence of militant Islamist groups.